Well, Susan, take me back to when you and David Foster first got involved and some of the first songs you wrote, and talk about your collaboration with David.
Okay, well, David was on the show before I came. Oh, David was on the show first, and when I came along, I walked into his living room, and there were 17 Grammys on his piano, and I thought, okay, and we talked for a while, and Bill decided to rent a studio for us to work in. And so, of course, Bill Haber does things in a big way. And he rented a room under the Steinway building. There used to be a Steinway store on 57th Street that sold pianos. And in the basement, they had pianos that were played by the best pianists in the country. All had beautiful white quilts on them, and they had their names on them. And David sat down and took one, threw the quilt off, and he said, "Come here, sit down. We're going to write a song now." Now, I had heard the music to this song because when Bill first mentioned him, he sent me a cassette of this. Remember cassettes? He sent me a cassette of this particular song, and the minute I heard it, I said, "I'm in." And so David began to play it. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll go home and I'll write it, and I'll bring you back a dress." He said, "No, sit down." And I said, "I don't write that way. I go home and I think about it and I write." He said, "Sit down." So I said, "Well, I know John Kander and Fred Ebb write that way, but very few people." He said, "Sit down." So he played the first two phrases, and he said, "Anything that comes into your head, come on." Now, I knew that we had talked about this song being something about around the corner. So I wrote the first two lines, and he said, "Great, see, I told you so. Now, do the next two." And he wrote. And I said, he said, "Do it." So for the first time in my life, I just sort of let go, and I did it. And I mean, I really did it. And then I was able to write the whole song. And I was amazed because I usually go home and sit at the computer and think, and but we wrote the whole song there, and that's the song that is still in the show today, and has the bouncing ball.
Yeah.
And that's the first song you wrote.
First song we wrote together, yeah.
It's such a fabulous song in the show. I mean, the whole audience gets involved for those of you who've seen it. And for those of you who haven't seen Boop yet, please go and see if you want to have the time of your life at the theater. But that's amazing. So has this changed the way you're going to start writing songs now when someone says to
No. With David,
Yeah.
if I write with David, sure.
Yeah.
Although most of the other songs we did together on Zoom. David lives in LA, I live in New York. We did a lot of it on Zoom. We did some of it just talking. We did one of them where he said, "Hey, I had an idea." And he ran over to a piano and he played something, and I said, "Wow." And I wrote something down, and it's whatever happens at the moment, actually. And the more comfortable you become together, the easier it is.
Yeah. But Jerry, what unlocked it for you? You and I had a conversation before about what unlocked the story, about how you saw Betty and how it was all playing out.
Well, the dancing is always the easy part for me. It's the story, really. That's what it is. And I listened to some of the stuff that they had written, and then I went back into the room and met with them, and I said, "I had this crazy idea. I didn't know anything other than the one picture of Betty Boop with one leg in the air looking fabulous on the back of a Harley Davidson jacket. That was about my extent of Betty Boop. So I did a lot of research, and I saw the black and white shorts, and I thought, well, what if she starts in that world and then she ends up in the real world, which is full of color, falls in love, finds something that's missing, it's love. She goes on the journey. When she finds it, she actually has to go back for some reason. Love follows her, and when it kisses her, her world turns to color. So your life is never full of color till your life is full of love. That was the elevator pitch. And that was what we settled on.
Yeah.
So and let's add in the incredible book writer, Bob Martin.
Yeah.
Yes.
Incredible. Bob and I had done halftime together. We had been working on other shows together, and so I suggested that Bob come on board and help us with the structure of the show, and he came on board and started to write it. And 26 drafts later, now a draft can only be a page or 3 pages, but every time, like for instance, when we did the first reading, Jasmine was Trisha. In the very first reading, because Trisha was 19 and she was Carol's daughter. And after that reading, I said, no, she needs to be Carol needs to be her auntie. She needs to be living in Harlem with her. Mom and dad are gone, and she's obsessed with Betty Boop. So I can get that connection between the two of them. So that's the way we restructured it after that reading. Jazz went off and did Mean Girls.
Yes.
And then I knew David loved her voice. I said she should come back in for Boop. And she came in, and that's how we got her to Boop.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, we get into the cast, as you all know. Okay, for each of you, what is it like living in this stunning world of Boop the musical? But I want to start with Jasmine because she is Broadway's newest breakout star. Just so you know, let's hear it seriously.
Thank you.
She is Betty Boop. She's making her Broadway debut. But before we get into that, for all the actors in this room and those watching around the world, did you blow your first audition for this? This is a big deal for all the actors.
I bombed this audition. And I've told this story so many times now, and thankfully it doesn't hurt or anything because I'm still here. But I really did. The scenes and the song went fine. It was when it got to the dancing that I really just really blew it. And I said to Jerry a while ago, I said, I've never wanted to walk out of an audition so badly, but that day I felt so defeated in a way that I'd never felt before. And I think it was so crushing because I felt so connected to the role and the part. And I just, like, my soul knew it had to be this. And so when I got that initial no, I was devastated, and I had to go back on tour. And everybody there was expecting me to come back with a yes, and they heard that I was coming back with a no, and they were devastated. It just felt awful. Yeah. It truly felt awful. And and then when I came back, they were still looking, and I thankfully Jerry let me back into the room because I am lucky to know him now. But it was a long journey to get here. Other people had like one audition, they got it. I had like 17.
No, because what I want to ask you is, this happens for all the actors. You walk into somewhere, you want something really badly, and you would become an incredible triple threat. But it was the dancing for you. Mm-hmm. So emotionally, where do you put the voices in your head, seriously? Yeah. And how do you say, I hope I can go back in here and show them again what I can do, and have the courage to do that? How do you do that?
It was a big pivotal moment for me because it was the first time in my life that I'd advocated for myself in that way. And as soon as I found out they were still looking, I called my agents. I'm with Paradigm, and they're the most amazing people on the planet. And I called them and I said, please, 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 how can I get back in this room? And they were like, oh, no, we'll see. And so as soon as I got the okay that I could go back, I immediately was in dance class because that was one way that I could take control of the situation. I know, I've been acting and singing my whole life, and obviously, there's always work to be done with that, but the dancing was where I really felt out of body and out of control. And so I took it back into control, and I was in tap classes for weeks up until I was back in the room with them. And then I got into the room and they had me do like an 8 count of a tap. And I was like, are you kidding me? But it needed to happen because I needed that confidence. But that's what ended up getting me the part. And I had a final work session with our associate, D.B. Bonds, who's worked with Jerry for a long time. And he told me, the one thing that's stopping you from getting this is the confidence. You're not owning it. You're not owning yourself. And how can we trust you to play this role if you don't trust yourself to play the role? So it took a lot. And I kind of just had to put on my big girl pants and trust in the art that I was creating and trust that what I had to offer was good enough. whether or not I booked it or not, that it was good enough to be in the room and they wanted me in the room. And so as soon as I did that, it was just the most freeing experience. And I left that final callback with like, it felt like the weight of the world was lifted off of my shoulders. And then I got it like the next day or something like that. But yeah.
And that's how it's done. Seriously. But you took really big steps.
I did. I was proud of I'm very proud of myself for that.
Well, now look where you are now,
Yeah.
starring on Broadway. So for the rest of the cast, Ainsley, so for you, tell me what it's like living in this beautiful world of Boop the Musical.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is the first show that I've done where I get to play a character that lives in a version of the real world. You know, I've been lucky enough to do beautiful shows like Aladdin and Cinderella and Wicked in these beautiful sort of fantasy worlds. But Dwayne lives in New York City in 2025. And even though this show is where we're dealing with a heightened version of reality full of color and joy and music and dance as a vocabulary, you know, it still has to have an essence and a flavor of the real world. So it was really exciting and interesting and fun to get into this character and figure out a way to deliver Dwayne, this gentleman who feels like he is grounded in a version of our reality, but also has to meet Betty and sort of commune with her on this heightened cartoon level, you know. And through the show, I feel like he starts to step into his own, and he starts to become more buoyant and extroverted, and Betty starts to become more grounded and more real, and that's what they offer each other through the show.
Yeah. Faith, for you, living in the world of Boop.
Well, I was, is this on?
Oh, yeah.
I was one of the last pieces to the puzzle, and Jerry called me out of the blue and said, you know, I have this character and I have these thoughts, and we had done Jerome Robbins years ago, and I did a number in Jerome Robbins called I Still Get Jealous, which was just kind of a pure form of love between a married couple. And he said, you know, I'm thinking something like that element for this real world when Grampy comes from the cartoon world. And we had, my character, Valentina, and Grampy had met 40 years prior, you know, which is already funny. And and you know me, I love some funny. So I actually got the script the night before when I flew in. I had never read it, and I literally went and did the reading the next day. So I had to make fast and bold choices. And it's been very interesting creating this character because Valentina is from the real world, like Dwayne, but I think Betty has a line in it. New York City is like people living in a cartoon or something like that. So, you know, between Jerry and I and Greg Barnes, and it's fun. This is the fun part, creating it. Because I said there's something cartoonish about me in the real world. Otherwise, I wouldn't connect with Grampy on some level. I mean, yes, they have minds alike. He's an inventor. She's an astrophysicist, you know. And I told Bob Martin the first day, and Jerry, I said, well, you know, my dad was a nuclear engineer, so I understand geeks. So, and he was a vaudevillian, so I thought, perfect, that's Valentina. You know, I've got my first little stable, you know, start. But then from Chicago to New York, the collar got bigger on my jacket. You know, there were little things that just added little cartoon things that you could see the connection. And it's like when you meet somebody and they're not like you, but there's an element that you share, that you connect on. So it's just fun, like creating all that.
Yeah. Erich, for you.
I just like watching Faith Prince do the show every night. That's why I'm here. It's been wild because it's I have to play this part that is a really horrible, horrible man. Truly awful. But it's a musical comedy, and it's not like some new age musical comedy. This is like Broadway musical comedy. Forward facing, here's the laugh. It's now your cue to laugh. Like it's a very forward facing show. So how do you do that with a character that is truly awful and saying terrible things, and then has a production number with a passe about such terrible things? And so it was about riding that line of he's truly an awful guy, but if he can't be that awful because I have to land these laughs, and if he's that awful, the laughs won't come. So it's been figuring out that things. We ended up cutting a scene that we had a Raymond and Carol were in a debate at one point in the Chicago version of the show, and I thought, oh my God, it's so funny. I love that scene, and I realized you gotta get past it, get moving, and it really does, make it better. But it's hard because it's every night I go out there, especially with the way that I'm the one connection to what people are seeing on the news right now in a show that tries to tell you to avoid that for 2 hours. I'm that one reminder of it. So that's a little tough because every night we dive a little bit into current events, just touching upon it. And Jasmine has this very hard job of weaving through it. Do I stop here, allow them to applaud for that empowering thing that she said, or push through it? It's always different where we're going, and every night I'm watching her like, how you gonna do it tonight? How you gonna do it? Because I'll watch her go to start to say the line and start to say something else, and then she'll stop and hold. It's really it's truly a little bit of an improv every night as to the phrasing of the lines, where we say the line, just in that one scene that we have together in Act Two. So it's an odd little thing I have, but that's what's so exciting about it. That this is not a show as forward-facing and as old-fashioned as it is. There is no way to walk through this show. Not because there's trap doors on stage or anything like that, but the audience is such a big part of all of our jobs because she's doing vaudeville comedy and jazz. It's every single thing. We are so dependent on the audience.
Yeah. But even though you play, I call him the villain, the audience loves when you come on stage and do something else.
He's the guy you love to hate.
That's right. Well, that's thanks to Bob. I had my entrance line was used to be one thing, and I think it was in the final, just before we froze the show.
2 days before we froze.
2 days before we froze, I emailed Jerry and I said, I have egg on my face. I just have egg on my face. There's got to be something better. I know there's something better. I don't know what it is, but I need something that gives information and says who this guy is right at the top. And he says, got it. And an hour later, he sent me back the most brilliant entrance line by Bob Martin. Anyone could say this line and get a laugh. I'm just lucky enough to have it. Yeah. But that's how great Bob is.
What's the line?
The line is, he walks on stage holding a phone and he says, no, I need this done by 4, and if you can't deliver it, then you are out of a job. Do you understand me? Thank you. All right, goodbye, Mom. This is classic vaudeville, Anyone could say that line. If you pause, you hold, and then say the kicker, you have a laugh.
Comedy math.
Actor proof.
Math.
And that's why I hired him, because I didn't have to direct it.
That's right.
I just said, give him the line. He'll know what to do.
And that's why the audience falls in love with you.
Sure, yes.
Yep. So let's talk about Chicago. I've had friends see this in Chicago and they fell in love with it then. But what kind of changes, Jerry, from your standpoint, once the audience was added in, what were some of the changes you wanted to bring to the show? And Susan, too, of course, with songs.
Well, it's called Boop, right? So it's based on Betty Boop.
Yeah.
So keeping the focus on Betty Boop, which is what he was just talking about. Erich had an amazing number in the second act where he took Betty Boop on a tour of New York City that I sort of half-baked staged, because I think I initially felt it was too much of Raymond, but I didn't want to take the number away because I didn't know what the whole shape of the show was. We didn't even have an opening to the second act until we got to New York. That opening number where everybody's in 2 colors going boom, boom, came from going to Chicago and learning the tools, seeing what the audience wanted, and then walking away and going, okay, I need to do an opening to the second act, and it needs to say this, and it needs to be everyone's looking for Betty Boop. So I told Susan and David what I wanted. They wrote a song. It came to me. I was in London. I was staying at the Covent Garden Hotel. I remember it came to me, and I listened to it, and I was like, oh, it's not right yet. And so I sat down and wrote some words out on a thing. And I sent them to her and I said, don't be offended, but I think this is the story. And I sent her a very specific story for the world of color and the world of black and white, and sort of an idea for a chorus. Where's Betty? Betty is here. We got to find her. Boop, 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 doop. And then she wrote the lyrics, sent them to David, and I sent David a song from 1930s that I'd found on Spotify of what I wanted it to sound like. And then they wrote the song based on that, sent it back to me. And then I called Greg and I said, we've got an opening number. I need clothes that are going to do this and this. But before you spend the money, make them out of sweatpants and let me make sure it's going to work. They made 4 sets in sweatpants and I got in the room and did. So you're doing the work. You go to Chicago to find out what's working, what isn't. Focus the story on Betty Boop. Take away a number from a brilliant actor who, by the way, just said, it's like a funnel. Yeah. You put everything in the top and you keep letting it swirl until you get that pure sauce coming out of the bottom. Exactly. And his character got stronger with less. Yeah. And if anybody ever says to me that, you know, I need more, I go, Marilyn Cooper, Woman of the Year, one scene, What's So Wonderful, curlers, bathrobe, Tony Award. Go look it up.
What we're finding out is that if I had only had curlers
and a bathrobe.
But the best part about, my favorite part about that song, Where Is Betty, and that flip, which has become, in my opinion, one of those iconic Broadway production numbers that you talk about decades and decades later, because I've never seen a costume and light change get entrance applause. But what was really interesting was in the rehearsal room, Jerry saw it in his head. And you know he saw it in his head because he was so freaking happy every time he got to this song. The cast couldn't have looked more miserable. because they're doing it in rehearsal clothing and they just keep flipping around and turning back around. And they looked like they would finish that song and they would have that look on their face that says, I'm calling my agent, get me out of here. This is our...
Jerry has lost his mind.
Jerry has lost his mind. But because I'm not in the number, I got to watch it in tech. And so I was sitting... I'm sitting out in the house and I see that flip for the first time. And I went... And I got on the text chain where the entire cast is on this group text chain. And I was like, you guys, this is the greatest. And they were like, what, really? And there was that invited dress, that first time they flipped. And it was like screaming. Yeah, it was wild. Yeah.
Well, this is what's so exciting about putting an original musical together, because it's like putting a cake together from scratch. Yeah. And it's all about collaboration. So for the cast, you know, Jerry, when you got this cast, and it's an original cast, how much did you let them like, oh my gosh, that's Ainsley, that's Faith, that's Erich, they can do this. Jasmine, she can do this.
As much as they brought into the room, I let them go. I did, didn't I? Yeah. Yeah. I did, because I learned it from Jack O'Brien, really. You know, Jack was one of my mentors, is one of my mentors, but as a choreographer, Faith and I worked with the great Jerry Robbins, and then I worked with Michael Bennett, and they were pretty controlling and strict as choreographers / directors. So I grew up with all of that, and then I meet Jack O'Brien, who is a director who allows everyone to bring their best into the room, and still as the director decides what will be used and what won't, but allows everybody to bring it in. And I find that it gives them ownership of the material. Right. They get to own it, right? Because they've invested in it. He also said this once. He said, let everybody invest in your show like they invest in a bank. Because when you leave the theater, which you will after the show opens, they've got something to withdraw on when they're doing 8 shows a week and they need to go back and take a withdrawal. They remember. So it's that. You want them to invest.
So for the cast, like Jasmine, what kind of conversations did you have with Jerry with the Betty Boop you wanted to create? What are the conversations?
You know, I think a lot of it just came from him asking me to trust that what I was doing was working. There were a lot of moments where I was like, is the voice okay? Is the physicality okay? Is it too much Jasmine? Is it not enough Boop? And a lot of that work, obviously, I did on my own at home. Like creating Betty and putting her into my body. But it was just, what I love about Jerry and working with him is that he sees he can see all the big picture, the things that you can't see, that you can't imagine. He sees it. And so he's a great sounding board to say, hey, is this working? Does this feel right? And he reacts in time. You know, when we're in the room, if something's funny, Jerry laughs. Like, he's giving you all of that as you're doing it. And so it's very, not to say it's rewarding, but it is, but it's also very informative of the work. And what's been very nice for me is that with Jerry and DB, they've said the more you put yourself into it, the more it works. Because I mean, Betty is she's not just a cartoon, but she's a cartoon. And we've only seen her in these little snippets, in these shorts. And so what we're getting to do in this show is fully flesh her out. And the only way to do that is to have somebody who is able to, you know, put that on them and help her do that. And so just trusting in myself. Once again, that's really what this all comes down to, for me at least, is trusting in myself that I've done the work and that I am a proper vessel for her to do that.
I really let them go. I don't give a lot of notes. I watch and I watch and I watch and I watch, and then I fix if something isn't working. I give them the time to do it several times and figure it out for themselves, because you can dictate and then it becomes your version as opposed to theirs. And D.B. Bonds, my associate director, by the way, who's responsible for all of these performances, sits next to me and we talk constantly. D.B. not only is a great director, he was a great actor. He played Emmett in the Legally Blonde tour for me. He played Norbert Leo Butz's part in the Dirty Rotten Scoundrels tour for me. Before he became my associate director and came onto the other side, he was a leading actor in big musicals, in national tours, and playing the lead roles. So he understands how to talk to an actor, maybe better than I do, because I'm a choreographer director, right? And I talk with my feet. I do. I quite literally talk with my feet first. But the collaboration and the way he gets my message to them is what's incredible.
Yeah. Ainsley, for you, what kind of conversations did you have with Jerry about what you wanted to bring to Dwayne?
Those conversations, or the best example, I think, is around the movement for Dwayne, really. And even though Dwayne is a guy who lives in 2025, he has sort of a nostalgia for something older than he is. And for me, that was a love for like 30s and 40s movie musicals. And so, for example, when we got to Why Look Around the Corner, Jerry sort of gave me the framework and said, this is where I think you move. This is the story of the number. Now go away. I trust you. I know what you can bring. Go away and explore some of the movement. So I went home and pulled up clips of, Gene Kelly in Summer Stock, where he's dancing on the bare stage with the newspaper and doing his soft shoe. And I watched how he moved and twisted and made shapes, and I borrowed from that and started to form the number. And I came in and Jerry was like, "That's great, you're dancing a lot. Like let's cut that, and keep this, and this will be the bones of our number." So they're totally thrilling collaborations, but also terrifying. It's the first time I've been in a position where I've been able to have a voice and advocate for a character and start to define a character's movement on stage.
And a character that lives in 2025, but thinks like someone who is in films in 1940s, 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I've actually been dreaming of this character for years and wanted to write a musical about a guy who is a Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly type guy who falls in love with a contemporary girl, and she's all hip hop, today, and he's all yesterday, but they live in today. And how does that relationship work? And I realized a few days ago, well, I've kind of created it here with this. It's part of what this is because it's been living in my head for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's thrilling to be in a room and have someone like Jerry trust you with having input on the movement of a character, given Jerry's incredible career.
Now, Faith, for you, because your character Valentina was sort of expanded upon between Chicago and New York.
Expanded, completely rewritten,
See?
from top to bottom.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So totally rewritten.
we had a lot of conversations, and I actually wrote a 5-page email between Chicago and New York, just thoughts I was having because I'd gathered all that information just from and again, I was like, I know I'm not the creative, but I've developed things. This is what I'm thinking. And he was sweet enough to, and I said, but it's a big email, and he had just come back from London. I said, you're probably jet lagged, but I just wanted to call and let you know it's coming and everything. Honestly, I would say the major conversation that really changed for me from Chicago to New York was the positive reinforcement of their relationship. And we really needed that kickoff because in Chicago, they had ended their relationship not well. So it was a huge hurdle to get over. And the opening line, Valentina, you've aged dramatically. And I said, that's really hard for me to get over. Right. It's unlike, now we're the same age. That's positive. And when it ended, it didn't work for then, but they had that connection. Then we could dip back into it and go forward. And Cure for Love became, there is no cure for love, there is no cure for love, there is no cure for love, but love. And that positive thing, then we were back hooked in. And we needed that kickoff. So I would say that was huge for Grampy and Valentina. And I felt great about that because he listened, gave the, Bob, and we all discovered it. And it made a huge difference.
And they were writing a new song for her.
Yeah.
That came 3 days before we went into rehearsal. Literally finished.
Yeah. Susan, talk about that. So when you got the notes from Jerry and everything, talk about this song that you wrote for Valentina and Grampy.
Oh, wow. Well, that wasn't as fast as the one before.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell this quickly.
Yeah.
We had to write a new song for Ainsley, and we got the information, and he said, well, we've just been through this scene, and this is the way he feels, and we've got to have a song here.
This was in Chicago.
Yeah.
And David and I have to say, David was having a terrible time with his back, and I was having a terrible time with my back. So I went to his hotel room, and he opened the door, and he said, "Oh, come in." And I said, "Okay." I said, "David, you go sit in a good chair." He said, No, you sit in a good chair." And I said, "No, David, it's your good chair. You go sit in it." So we wasted like 10 minutes doing that. Finally, we sat down, and somehow or other, we started to talk about this. And he came up with a sort of theme for the introduction. And I said, "You know something? It would make a great bridge, too. Why don't we use it for the introduction and the bridge?" And he played both of them. And then he said, "Yeah, but now we've got all these verses." I said, No, just... And somehow or other, in less than 2 hours, we had that song. He was, sitting over the keyboard like this, and I was sitting in the chair like this. But we had it, and he said, "Call Jerry." So we called Jerry, and in came Jerry and Dee Dee and I forget who else.
Maybe
Rack,
Rochelle.
Rack, and probably somebody else. And they sat down like this, and David played the song, and my God, Jerry got up and he started to dance, which is a sure sign that the song is, that he likes it. And in the morning, in one morning, we had that song.
I think it was a Friday or Saturday. I don't remember, but Sunday was the day off, I think, or Monday was the day off.
Monday was the day off.
And I said, "Ainsley, I know it's your day off, but would you mind if we went into a studio and just played, because I want to put it in the show on Tuesday?" And Ainsley
I said, if David and Susan have written me an original song, yes. I'm coming in.
And we were in the room for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. We staged the whole number, roughly what we wanted to do. Went Tuesday into tech rehearsal. I put it in the show like within an hour and a half. We put it in that night. The crowd went absolutely crazy. And I knew they needed to hear from Dwayne. They needed to hear that she knocks me out. They needed to know. And the song went in, and that was it.
Yeah.
And then we put some girls in it in previews, dancing, and I cut them because we didn't need the girls.
Yeah.
You try things.
I do remember a look of, I guess it was panic on Ainsley's face that very morning when he was going to learn the song, but he learned it. Like, he learned it really fast. And suddenly,
because we had been in Chicago, and again, this is the first time we're creating a new show, and we hadn't made any huge changes, and I was sort of backstage with some of the cast, and I said, oh, it'd be really fun if we had like a really big change structurally, just to see how we would all handle it. The next minute, Jerry says, we're putting a number in just for you.
oh my gosh.
But see, this is like old school. I remember Gwen Verdon told me in Damn Yankees, A Little Brains, A Little Talent was written in the morning, and they put it in that night with just a piano before it was even orchestrated. You know, I mean this old school in the best way. This is how shows used to be put together. You know, a new number out of town and this, that, and the other thing. I think it's so great.
Well, Susan and David, they would sit in the room.
Yeah.
And Jerry would look to the left when something wasn't working.
Yeah.
And then you would see David run into the other room and would come back with something. And Susan, I don't know how, I can't listen to music while I'm like writing an email. Like my brain, there would be one song going on, rehearsing in front of her, and her lyric sheet would be out with her marker, writing out the lyrics for something else, like it was like that character in Proof where they're writing the equation. It was like, how are you doing this? And that's when you have Jerry Mitchell, Bob Martin, Susan Birkenhead, and David Foster, you have four people who have written, again, it goes back to audience first, right? Why Look Around the Corner? That will be sung for eons, right? That's a song that works outside of this show. Same with Where I Want to Be. It's like, you know, when you all of a sudden You Can't Stop the Beat from Jerry's Hairspray, all of a sudden every school choir, you know, in the world was doing that for 20 years. There are these songs and these moments that live on outside just its first moment. And I think that's because everything, I mean, you know, look at David's history, look at those songs. Yeah. Those are songs that gave the audience, the public, exactly what they wanted and then a little more.
I think Why Look Around the Corner, when I first got the song from you guys, because it was one of the first ones you wrote, it wasn't for Betty, it wasn't for Dwayne, it was just the song. They had written the song and it didn't say who sang it. It was just the song. And then we played around with different versions where Dwayne sang it to Betty or Betty sang it to Dwayne or they both sang it together. And I said, no, wait. He's got to sing the song to her. So we did a whole verse and chorus where he sang the song to her. And then I said to Bob, I said, Bill has been harping for a year about a bouncing ball. And I didn't know why until I went and did my research, but it was Lou Flesher who took the bouncing ball and put it back into style in their cartoons. And they did it, you know, one brother would crank the box with the letters on, the other brother would hold the ball. It wasn't animated, it was live. They shot it live. And I said, okay, well, how do we get a bouncing ball into the show? And then I said to Bob, this is how. She says, you know, in my world, when somebody does this, there's usually a bouncing ball. Yeah. And then she looks at the moon, it turns into a bouncing ball and it bounces, the lyrics appear. And I said, that's how it's going to work. And then she sings it to him. And then they sing it together, then they dance and they fall in love and then Grampy comes. And so I said, that was kind of how it worked, how we figured out how the number would be structured and what its purpose would be in the show.
But the scan of the music and the lyrics together on that, because it's not complicated and because it sits so perfectly, when we do the reprise of it after the bows, we're newly opened, right? There's no cast album out yet. They sing it back to us. We hear it coming back because it's so instantly memorable that they heard it 15 minutes prior, and now they're able to sing it back to us.
And they've got the words in a bounce.
And the words are also above it, yes.
That helps.
No, but it's one of those it's one of those beautiful, Broadway show songs that you could hear in a show, and by the time you leave the theater, you could sing it on the street. And that's what's great about this show.
That's
So
called an earworm.
I like that.
Really?
Well, there's a lot of earworms in the show because believe me, the score to the show is absolutely beautiful. So, Eric, did you want to add anything about, you talked earlier about stuff that was added, what kind of conversations you had with Jerry?
Oh, honestly, it was always about how much can we get away with, because Jerry's one of those people where he believes in the power of theater. He believes in the power of before there was video, before there were projections, we all learned from Jerry Robbins, Hal Prince. That's what Faith and Jerry worked with these guys directly. I was able to look at their work and grow up on their work. But Jerry believes in the power of theater without additional technology. That if we just do it, they will believe it. They will go along for that ride. You don't have to go, yeah, but these days it's like, no, this is musical theater. If you walk into a show called Boop and you go, well, I don't know, then leave because you're already not, it's musical comedy. It's musical comedy. The show is called Boop with an exclamation point at the end of it. Right? What exactly are you looking for if you're not having a good time at Boop? And I think that belief in the power of theater as an art form. This is not a TV show. This is not a movie. There are some cool kind of technology things that we do in this show, but this is a forward-facing show. So the conversations were always, where's the laugh? Where's the awe line? Where is the audience? What are they looking for? How do we hold back from giving it to them for one beat longer and then give it to them? I think those were the conversations we had. And I also know where Jerry's mind goes, because the first time that we started to work on Take It to the Next Level, which is my song in Act 2, the very first thing I said was, so what do you want to do with this? And he said, I don't know, but you have to end up standing on the desk. That was the very first thing he said. I said, oh, okay, what about before that? He said, I don't know, but you got to end up on the desk. And so we kind of did it backwards, but it's just about joy. It's just about I hate to simplify it to that level. I'm sorry that it's not deeper than that. It's a musical comedy. Yeah. We're giving people the thing that they said, my mom got to see the original company of. My grandfather got to see the original company of. You don't have that anymore. You got to, you can, this Instagram generation, there's a lot of different kind of theater, and all of it's wonderful and all of it's really cool and wild. Very rarely do you get that pinwheel in the opening number of this show and the audience just goes wild for this kind of Rockettes style thing. You don't have that anymore. And that's what this show is. This is a show that everyone will get to say, I got to see the original company of Boop.
See, this reminds me when I first fell in love with the theater as a kid, when I used to come to see big, splashy Broadway musicals that just entertained you. That's what they did. And you walked out of the theater 12 inches off the ground, just having the time of your life. And that's what your show does. I have to give a big shout out to your creative design team.
Yes.
I mean, David Rockwell, scenic design, Greg Barnes, costumes, Philip Rosenberg, lighting design, Gareth Owen, sound, Finn Ross, projections, Skylar Fox, illusions. Is it Sabina Majid? Wig and hair design, flawless. Is it Michael Clifton, makeup design?
Yeah.
Yes.
The Huber marionettes. And talk about your two associate choreographers.
Rochelle Rack and John Rua couldn't do it without them.
I mean, you literally walk into the theater and you feel like you're back in Betty Boop in the early days, and then you're brought into contemporary now and watching it switch back and forth. So did you all watch Betty Boop shorts? Like, Jasmine, for you, was there one that said, oh, now I've got her because I watched this one?
I've watched a lot of them,
Yeah.
but one of them that I always think back to when I'm justifying. Honestly, when I'm justifying how much of myself I can bring to Betty, there is this one clip. It's an early one. I think she might still be a dog. But she's in her house and she's clipping her toenails with a pair of very large scissors. And it's so strange and so weird, but it's still Betty Boop. And I love that clip because I'm like, this shows the expanse of like who she is, or there's so much of her and there's so much history to bring all of that together. So I can be kooky and strange and crazy, and it is still honest to the source material, but also there is that more graceful energy that she has as well. But I do spend a good amount of time like looking back just to refresh and see how they move is important to me and things like that. But yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Ainsley,
funny.
did you watch some Boops? Did you watch some shorts?
Yeah, I've definitely
To get
watched
the
some
feeling?
of it. But for Dwayne, he's a guy that doesn't know much about her at all, And then there's a line in the show where he finally sits down one night and looks at one of her shorts because he says, "I've never seen any of your movies," and she says, "Well, they're called shorts," for start. And so as a way of making up, he sits down and watches The Old Man from the Mountain. And finally, sort of starts to discover who she is. So I've seen that short, and a bunch of others, of course. But for us in the real world, I guess it just informs a little bit of how we move and how we start to become more cartoonish, if you will, as the show goes on.
Faith, for you with Valentina, did you go back
Honey,
for style?
I grew up on the shorts. I have a Betty Boop doll. My brother used to think I sounded like Betty Boop. I said, my friends were like, "Are you going to play Betty Boop?" Honey, I'm a little long in the tooth for Betty Boop. But I said, I belong in that world, I can tell you that. But I knew exactly who she was. And I loved her because she was two things. She was fun and wacky, and she was also incredibly smart and female empowerment. Yeah. And you just don't get better than that. And look how long ago that was. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was before his time. Yeah. Max Fleischer, you know.
Eric, for you, did you go back and look for flavor?
No. No. My grandmother was named Betty, and she had a little coin purse, Betty Boop. But Jasmine's my Betty. I mean, but you don't get that I mean, that's a 4D performance. That's Lucille Ball level. You guys get to see it from the audience. You won't believe she is so crazy, Jasmine. She is so I mean, you don't get that brain warmth talent. It comes along once in a generation. This performance is a 4D performance that I also get to witness, and all of us get to witness on stage with her, because she's not acting, and she's Betty Boop. She is my Betty. For a lot of these people, she is. I'm going to say
and
something
it's completely original.
Yeah.
And it's completely original.
A new musical, new songs, new scenes.
But I want to say something
dances.
that has not been said a lot. You don't see this. I haven't seen this recently. I haven't seen this at all. The amount of young women of color who come to our show and who are sitting in a Broadway musical of a show is not about race specifically, that is a wild thing. That's because of her. And that's what's so exciting to see, is this next generation looking at her as their Betty Boop, the way that my grandmother saw it.
Beautifully put. Yeah. Gorgeous. So you just talked about watching performances. So I'd like to ask the cast, when you're not on stage, what is one of your favorite performances of someone else on this panel that you watch? Is there a moment in the show it's like, I love to watch Jasmine do this, or I like to watch Ainsley do this?
I love the iconic 8 minutes at the beginning of the show. I listen, because I don't come until 40 minutes into the show, and I turn my squawk box up. Yeah, it's a squawk box. Up, and I listen to the whole first 8 minutes, and I can't wait to hear the audience reaction after that. Versatility.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. I love watching Ainsley. I love watching him float across the stage. And he had his number, She Knocks Me Out, we added back in Chicago. It's one of my favorite moments in the show. I always love just getting to watch him do what he does best. I mean, Ainsley is a man that does it all. You're talking about him dancing, but it just lives in his body in a way that is so gorgeous, and I just love to watch him do his
tone.
thing. Yeah, he can sing too. And look at his face.
We had a school group. We had a school group matinee the other day, and everyone got lovely applause. And then Ainsley took his bow.
Screaming.
The screaming girls in the balcony.
Shrieking.
But wait, what's Morgan's
Like
last name?
whistle toning.
What's Morgan's last name? I'm
Morgan
blanking.
McGee.
Morgan McGee. Morgan McGee and Christian Probst in our show. They play the two New York One reporters. One of them's on screen. One of them's on stage. I get so jealous of what they do. They are stupid funny, to the point where when we come out the stage door afterwards, the people that scream for the two New York One reporters because they are so brilliantly funny and so exactly news reportery. It is so perfect.
Now that's a feature right there.
Yeah. Ainsley, for you, favorite number you like to watch?
I don't know if I've told you this, but I always watch your entrance because it's the sort of the major break in the first act, and I just love seeing, because you talk about sort of the character comes on 40 minutes into the show, and so I love just observing how the audience receives that, how they receive you as Faith Prince Tony winner, how they receive Valentina, and I guess it's sort of informative for us about how we're tracking with the show. If the audience is with us, if they're ready for a new character, if they're invested in your love story, all of that. So I love watching that scene.
So since we have a lot of actors in the house today and many watching around the world, there's a question for Jerry. What do you look for in a room when someone comes in to audition for you? Not someone who's already done a lot of shows, but for newcomers you haven't seen before. What do you look for when they come in to audition for you?
Confidence. I mean, Jazz's first audition for me actually goes back to 2019.
19. I just left college. Yeah.
Yeah, she came in for a musical called Becoming Nancy, and it was that first audition, that very first audition I ever met her. I remember she had a crop top and jeans on. I remember it was a small room, a very small room. She was there, the piano was there. She sang 2 songs. I don't remember the songs, doesn't matter. I thought to myself, this is the girl. This is the girl I want in this role. And this was for Becoming Nancy, for the role of Frances. This is a girl that I want in my world, in my life.
Yeah.
She has got something that I can't define. And that's what I look for, is that thing I can't define. And somebody who walks into the room and you see them for a split second and you realize this person is going to be doing this the rest of their life if they choose, because they're that good. They're that impressive. That was the impression. So when she didn't do well at her first Boop audition, in the back of my head, I went away and thought, what was it? What was it? And so I looked everywhere. In New York, I looked in London for Boop. I looked everywhere. And then she was back on the table, but she never really left my mind. So she came in a couple more times, and the dancing, I don't care if somebody can dance or not. You need to show me that you can learn. Then I'll be okay, right? It doesn't matter if you actually can do the steps. If I can teach you, then I know then I know we're going to be okay. But it was, I stepped out of the room because I'd met her so many years ago and we had already done one show together. Yeah. I didn't want to be the person who was, she was trying to impress me. So I said, DB, you work with her. I'm going to leave the room. And DB worked with her and he said, oh, it was much better. I said, I was probably freaking her out. She was probably focusing on me, trying to impress Dad, as opposed to just doing the thing. And so so that was what helped.
Yep. Now for the performers, Jasmine, you told us how you bravely went back and became a big star on Broadway. For Ainsley, Faith, and Erich, what is your secret to a good audition? Did you always like auditioning? And what is your secret when you open that door and you go through there?
I mean, I always try and have just a small moment of banter at the start to try and show that I'm a personable and joyous human, even if it's just like, introducing yourself, how was your day, thank you for having me, like that sort of thing. And some panels are receptive and some aren't, and that's fine. And I also have a song that I sing sort of for every audition, regardless of the brief, and it says, please sing a pop song from the 80s, or please sing a ballad from the 20s or 30s. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take my song. because I know I do it well and it serves me. And of course, I have to take other material in case. But yeah, I always sing "Use What You Got" from the live. That's what I sang for Jerry, and then we sang material. So they're my little tricks.
Beautiful.
Two things come to mind. When auditions changed for me immensely when I stopped worrying what they were looking for and what I was there to show. Because I couldn't read their mind. There was no way I was going to ever read their mind. So the minute I sort of took over my point of view, and I'll give you an example. When I went into audition for Guys and Dolls, I took a song. I kept thinking because I couldn't do the lament. I had to do something else. They didn't want to hear the lament. So I thought, what's a song textually that would give over the same kind of feelings that Adelaide was going through, but maybe more depthful, maybe just something a little, turn it on its ear. So it came to me one night in a dream that I would do Something Wonderful, which is a song from King and I that Lady Tiang sings about the king. And I decided, I got a friend of mine, Scott Frankel, who wrote many shows, Grey Gardens, War Paint, and he designed the orchestration, and I went in and sang Something Wonderful as Miss Adelaide. He will not always say what you would have him say, but now and then he'll say something wonderful. And I did the whole thing with a cold. And everybody kept thinking, what the fuck is this? And it just took them off their beam.
Yeah.
And that's how I got the job.
Wow.
So, auditions.
And you got a performance today.
Wow. Erich, for you auditioning.
I would say the same as Faith. I would say walk in with a vision. Walk in with you. You're not right for every job. I mean, we can't all be Aaron Tveit. I'm kidding. He's beating me out for all of them. No, but I mean that you have to bring to the table your bag of tricks. That's what it is. The other thing I would say, and this isn't so much audition advice, but I would say you have no excuse to not be educated about the forefathers. Yeah. If you're auditioning for a musical that Susan Birkenhead wrote, you have no excuse to not know the other musicals she wrote. You have no excuse not to know where Jerry's history is. The internet, the one good thing about the internet is the information it provides, the true information it provides. And that is, as a young actor, if you want to get into this, you start with AFI's top 100 movies of all time, go down the list, watch every single one. Whatever that list is for the theater world, start there. The New York Public Library at Lincoln Center, the Performing Arts Library, has every show on tape. You have no excuse to, when someone gives you there's no new ideas. There's just new color on it. You have no excuse not to know what the people in the room with you have done and how they got here and how you got here. So that's my thing.
I want to thank you all. Like I said, I've known you all for a long time. I've known everybody on this panel when you started out and continue to do what you do. But I want to thank you for literally giving Broadway one of the most glorious, fun-filled musicals where we can just forget about the world and just have a fabulous time at the theater. This is the company of Boop.